Exodus 20. I was thinking the other night, the commands that he has given to the children of Israel, or many of these things have been reiterated. We're not under the Ten Commandment law, even though there's a lot of people that say, well, we're still under the Ten Commandments. We're not. That was the old law, or the law of Moses, and we are not under that. We're under a new law. That is the law of Christ. Yes, many of the things were restated that we are living under today. Yes, they're the same, we might say same principles, but as far as the Ten Commandment law, we are no longer under that. So even though you might see these signs out here, you know, get back to the Ten Commandments or something along that line, we do not want to live under the old Mosaic law, because under the old Mosaic law, it also required animal sacrifices. It also meant that you had to go back to for the males, had to go back to the temple or to the place of worship in Jerusalem for some 3 times a year for different feasts. And we can see there's quite a bit that's going to be involved as far as the animal sacrifices. We do not any longer have the high priest, the tribe of Levi, and some of the other things. So you can see that there's be quite a problem. But to study these 10 commandments and the things that they had to do and the things that we have to do today, I think we come to understand why God gave these commandments and why we're under a new law, and they are reiterated. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Okay. Well, I think that was, if I'm not mistaken, was that during a battle, wasn't it not? The blood was flowing through the streets. I can't remember it then. It may be a good question. I can't give you an answer to that one. I don't know right offhand. There's a lot. There's no doubt about that. Okay. But we can see that under the old law, it required animal sacrifices. Now, also under the animal sacrifices, what type of animal? Was it to be just any kind of animal, or a certain? It was to be, yes, it's going to be a perfect. It was without spot or without blemish, and these things were to be offered unto God for a sacrifice. All right. Any questions over the other questions, the first 8 questions we dealt with there on page 6 of our study? And we'll probably get through this morning. And I think that to me, it has been a wonderful study to understand more fully these commands that God gave. And for these individuals to stand in the presence of God and to understand these laws or these tablets that Moses had were written by God. And I think this is also a great, we might say, better understanding, or get us a better understanding of what God can do as well. And we're going to talk about that as well this morning. All right, what was the early church advised to do in Acts, the 15th chapter, there in verse 24 beginning? Anyone? No questions? Do I? All righty. And when we talk about these things there in chapter 15, let's notice something there in verse 24 beginning. For as much as we have heard that certain which went out from us have troubled you with words subverting your souls. Is this a problem that the early church had as far as trying to alter the commands of God? Trying to blend take the old law into law of Moses in trying to put this in. All right. So they're trying to subvert the law or change the law of God. And why would man want to do that? All right. This is one of the things that we want to deal with this morning. When God gave the Ten Commandments, the voice of God almost can echo through these laws. I could almost imagine in my mind, here is these laws, and as they are given, the finger of God writes them down, and here is Moses in the presence of God. These things are being written. Can you imagine the thunder and the glory that was there on that mountain in the presence of God? And then whenever they are brought back down to the people to give them the law by which they are to live by, the first thing, and we've talked about this, we talked about it last week, first thing that Moses sees when he comes back is what? The golden calf that they've made. And yes, and they sat down to eat, and then they rose up to play, it says. So here is the same thing. Man wants to change things to please himself many times, does he not? Yeah. Man has a tendency, I want to do it my way. Now, you can go to Burger King and have your sandwich your way, but when it comes to God's laws, it is what God's law says. In the discussion, no need trying to change it. And in fact, did he not give us a warning in the book of Revelation? Yes. He said, he said, he that addeth to, God shall add to him the plagues that are written in his book. What if we take away from him? Take his name out of the book of life. So we can see very quickly the results of altering God's laws. Now, that's right.
I mean, it just needs to be one time, but evidently it was important or it would have been defeated.
Okay.
Those generations, each one to remember.
Well, again, when we find the early church and its establishment, the apostles, the teachers, the miracles, all these things that God has given to them to use to persuade people to become Christians or to convince them of the need to become a Christian, then if there's all this evidence, what else could be the conclusion? It must be from God. And this is why that I'm astonished at people. If there is all this evidence that God has given to us, why don't we believe the evidence? You know, if there's an accident and here's the police officer that investigates this, and it's obvious about who caused the accident and things along this line, and they investigate, and it is fully, the full conclusion is this person was the cause of it, and on and on. There's this evidence. So whenever they go to court, what do? Do they present people's, well, this is the way I think, this is the way I look at it, or they use the evidence? Evidence. So there's no denying the evidence. Here is God. Here's the evidence of God. Why are they denying it? Okay. That's what we're talking about. All righty. We're going to kind of run across a fellow here. There in verse 25, it seems good unto us, being assembled with one accord, to send chosen men unto you or to others to teach them the correct way, what God has for you to do. Now, who are these individuals that God is going to send? Does anybody remember? It tells you. Paul and Silas, Paul and Barnabas, on these missionary journeys. Barnabas is a unique character, is he not? You hear about Barnabas before? Yes, we do. Acts 1. So Barnabas is an individual who has been with the apostles, evidently, and evidently he had been. What was the requirements to become an apostle? What were the 3 requirements? Been with Jesus, seen the resurrection. What else? Sir? Miracles. There you go. So here is the things that are evidence that he was qualified. So if he goes with Paul, which had been changed, his name had been Saul, now it's Paul, and they go, this is the evidence. They are of God. What else can you argue? Or how much could you argue? Here's the evidence. So what was the early church advised to do? Do what God commands. No problem. Now, notice there in verse 28, for it seemeth good to the Holy Ghost and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things. God has always made things simple for man to understand. Let's go back to Tom's comment there in Genesis, the 3rd chapter. Well, actually in the 2nd chapter as well, too. But God had placed one tree in the midst of the garden with a simple command: thou shalt not eat of it. How hard is that? You know, I can tell one of our grandchildren, don't do that. And they'll turn and do something else. They understand. Now, these are full-grown individuals. They have a mind. They have a choice. We see that later on whenever Satan tempted them, right? So they could understand what God said. It wasn't something hard. Simple command, thou shalt not. These laws, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt not do that. We understand that. How simple can you be? Or how more simple can it be? Then here is the laws. They are going to have to go back to these congregations because people are subverting or diverting or changing or trying to alter God's laws are going against the evidence. What do? Send somebody over there that can straighten it out. Paul and Silas, Paul and Barnabas, we see on a number of occasions are doing just that. Now, that they may abstain from meats offered to idols. I think there was something, what was it, last week or something along that line about the offering of meats to idols. If it offends someone, don't do it. You understand that? All right. So I think we can understand that. As far as the early church, it's hard to get started because what had they been taught all this time? The 10 Commandment law? Yes. Now to kind of change it, they had been used to, so that's a good way of saying it, taught, and now to change some of these things, it's kind of hard for them to understand. All right. Any questions? All right. What always accompanies idol worship? That is very true right there.
Well, they can see the idol because they hold it in their hand. They can't hold God in their hand and see his head in front of them. That's what they
Okay.
say. They can't see. You can do it for God outside, inside, you breathe in the air.
All right, verse 23 just kind of sums it up, and then after that, and they changed the glory of the uncorruptible God, which would be the creator of all the universe, into an image made like to corruptible man or beast or something along that line. When we cannot see something, do we believe it? Well, if it's somebody that's reputable, someone that is one that we love or appreciate, a family member or something along that line, what they tell us, we believe. How do we do that? I have faith that they're telling me the truth, right? Okay. So here is God telling us these things about himself from the book of Genesis through the book of Revelation. We have never seen God. We have the evidence of God. That's obvious. Every day we walk on the earth, there's the evidence of God. But as far as something tangible that we can get our hands on or taste or see, we don't have that. So we're walking by faith. What is he saying here? What goes along with idol worship? The first thing, well, I've got to have something I could see. I've got to have something that I could touch. Why? If we walk by faith, why do we have to have all these things? Huh? All right. We are people that what state is it? Missouri. You know, show me. Show me. Well, here's all this evidence. How much more do you need? Well, I want to see. Was this not another one of the things that Jesus faced with? He said, show us a miracle. Prove that you're the Son of God. Well, what he'd already done. They still didn't believe it. So from verse 23 all the way through to the end of this chapter, all this is incorporated in. I know it just uses through verse 27, but verse 32 has all this, deals with this problem. And I think we need to use all of that. Of course, we're not going to read it this morning because of the length of it. But being filled with all unrighteousness and fornication and wickedness. You see what idol worship, getting away from God, does? What does it do to the mind of man? What's it? They did that which was right in their own eyes. Well, this feels pretty good. Let's do it. And they go after this or they go after that. And, well, you know, we like it to do it this way. And we like to do it that way. And we see constantly how man wanders away from God. We won't accept it. Okay.
Don't you think, Milton, that a lot of people do what they do in different religions and worship of idols because that's what we have believed and done for centuries?
Oh, yes, yes. And along the same line, let's go to verse 24, along with that thought. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, and dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth. Now here it is again. We talked about that the beginning, the middle, and the end of God's book. He has given us a warning, don't change it. Who've changed the truth of God into a lie and worship and serve the creature more than the creator. Again, man's idea, well, I can sustain myself. I have need of nothing. Was there a congregation kind of like that in the book of Revelation? We have need of nothing. God said you're maybe you're rich monetarily, but you're wretched and poor and miserable and blind and naked. You did. Said, I have somewhat against you. We understand that. All right. So what accompanies the idea of idolatry? All right. Verse 26. And this cause God gave them into vile affection for even their own women to change their natural use into that which is against nature. Sounds like You know, if you were to write some of these things today in the newspaper, current events, be the same thing. Wouldn't it? Sounds just like what we're doing, what our world is doing. Verse 27, and likewise also men leaving the natural use of the women, burned in their own lust, one after another. And we can see there in verse 27 and 28. And even as they did not like to, there's the key. They did not like to do what? Retain God in your minds. Okay, that's it. They don't want God. Well, if you tell me it's wrong, then you know I feel guilty. But if you don't tell me it's wrong, then I can just do whatever I want to do. Notice also
that word retain, Greek term hold, which to me makes it even more significant. Because if there's something that I retain, I'm holding on to it. Yeah. Which meant that at one time, some of these very same people had the knowledge of God. They were taught that. That's in their background. Yeah, and they decided not to hold on to it. They had given up on it. And somehow just completely become ambivalent to God altogether. And I don't want to hear anything about him. I don't want to know about his teaching. Now there's reasons for that. When you start looking at the points that he's making in respect of their retaining, you see their behavior.
Mm-hmm. That's what we're going to do.
Nobody likes to hear about the fact that my behavior is not right. And if you're going to come to me and talk to me about what God's saying about it, I really don't want to.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is exactly what the world is going through today. And I talk about world, I'm talking about the whole world. Notice what are the things he's talking about? Verse 29, being filled with all unrighteousness. Now here is fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit. What are all these things going on today? Is it not describing man today?
Yes.
Yeah. Without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, and placable, unmerciful, and knowing. Now, right here is the thing that I want us to understand, verse 32. Who, knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things. Here is, I know what the consequences of, but I enjoy it so much.
So that goes right back to what you saw in verse 28, where they did not like to retain God. They know the judgment of God, and that's the reason why they don't want to hear anything about it.
Yeah. But notice along that line, notice also in the middle of this verse, what are the consequences? Knowing God, knowing these things, what are the consequences? They know the consequences of what they're doing. What is the consequences? Death. Death. Not only in a physical sense, as far as the body can be over, let's say, as far as drugs.
It incorporates both of them. So like we have capital punishment for murder and things of that nature. Back then, you could be put to death for blasphemy.
Mm-hmm.
You could be put to death for adultery. That means any number of things. Disobedient to parents, they take you out and stone you. So I mean, that was under that law, but it incorporates both, not only physical but the spiritual death.
Okay. And notice also along the same line, who is also condoning this or allowing this?
That's the group that oftentimes left out.
That's right.
You got one over here that's just as guilty as can be, but then if I agree with it, the American Family says also consent with them.
That's it. But have pleasure in them.
If I agree with it, I'm just as guilty as I do.
That's right. That's
You
exactly.
don't even have to agree with it. All you got to do is just consent to the fact that I'm just going to be indifferent.
Mm-hmm. That's the idea. All right. So these are some of the things that it leads to. When we leave God out, this is the consequences. Let's say from years gone by, the nature of man. when our nation, well, let's go back. I love to see the history of man, the nature of man whenever he came to this nation or came to this land. What was the purpose of it? Freedom of worship, okay? Now, we understand that. The laws that our nation was based upon were for what? Are based on what? Laws of God? Yes. Then after that, we can also see as far as the laws of God, our nation began to flourish because of these things. God, I think God blessed us. Now what happened now, 200 years later? What's our nation like? And
Well, it's fickle, let's put it this way. I mean, when you came to September 10th, 1911, people really didn't care all that much, you know. But after September 11th, then you have every congressman and senator on the steps of the Capitol building, you know, praying and worshiping and things of this nature. But then you had some that saw this as inconsistent with some of the positions that they have held, and so then they decided, well, we don't need to do that anymore. Let's work against it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had to kind of, you know, everybody's forgetting it anyway, that kind of thing. So now they turn against him, and now you see him just completely.
it's getting back to what we talked about here earlier in verse 28, the different sins that they're committing.
Well, what you're seeing was those that were carrying out these kinds of activities like this, they carry a lot of purse strings.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so what they do at that particular point in time is, well, we'll just abide and wait. You know, let everybody go through this, but once it gets passed and everything's settled down, then we'll come back and put the pressure on them. So this is the way things really need to be.
Right.
So now you see everything returning back to the worldly concepts.
That's it. And again, we don't want to retain God in our minds because it tells us we're doing the wrong thing. And this is the sad thing about it. And whenever he gives us these warnings and tells us what the consequences are, and we still disregard God, fully knowing what's going to happen if we do it.
Yeah. I do believe mental illness exists.
Oh, yes.
But I think a lot of this is they're fighting against God.
Yeah.
And they don't want to do what they know, even by nature, is right to do. So everybody, all of this mental illness stuff, and it's those.
Well, then you've got those that dismiss that
Right.
and say, no, it's normal. Don't think of yourself as being mentally deranged or anything of that nature. So they'll convince them it's not anything wrong with you. It's just nature. Don't worry about it. And that's how this continues to be propagated.
Just a natural thing. So this, once God is taken out of the equation, this is the consequences. That's what we're getting at. This is the consequences of our nation. This is the consequences of getting God.
Do you think a lot of people believe there's condemnation and hell? Do they believe that's what you just said?
Well,
They know the consequences, but they do it anyway?
well, I think they may know the consequences, but they don't realize what the consequences really are. That's it. They don't think about, well, death, it's going to happen to all of us. They're not thinking about the eternal death. They're thinking about just the physical. So I'm just going to do all I can possibly do while I'm in the physical death.
Well, the thing a lot of these people do, they try to play both ends against the middle. They want to, I believe in Christ, I'm a Christian. But I think that this is how Christianity and God, I think the Lord Jesus would want us to accept these things. That's how they play these things. And without any consideration whatsoever, really, what the law teaches, because they don't look at the New Testament at all as being something that is the guide and the discipline for a person's life. That there's where then the mixture of humanism comes in.
That's it.
You've got that concept of it, and all of this kind of converges in on one, so that's where they try to play both ends against the middle.
Well, their idea is, well, God's a loving God, and He wants me to be happy. That's the thing.
God's loving, he could not, because it says he does all those people to the laws, but it also goes on to say, he wants you to obey his word. That's my big life. He don't mind with it as long as you are doing what I command.
But to see, that's so narrow.
I know.
I mean, you know, it's too restrictive.
They don't realize how long forever is,
Yeah.
how long you gonna suffer. And I think that their experience.
Like we say, spend the term,
Right.
spend it.
Yeah.
You spend money.
And they think it's just
spend
for
time, but you can't spend eternity.
The concept of narrow, just as the Lord taught in Matthew 7, straight and narrow, the term stenos and the plibo. You've got, it's a narrow path. And you can illustrate it in a couple of different ways, but you imagine it like this. I've seen some of these videos of these people walking these trails in the Andes Mountains, you know, that are about that wide. And you're falling off about 1,500 feet if you mess up. And now, if you're going to walk in a narrow path, that's a restricted path. But if you've got the goal to be met at the end of the trail, you're going to do what's necessary in order to stay on the path. Because, I mean, it'd be superfluous to go up there with just the idea, but really doesn't make any difference. You know, you can slip off and fall, everybody's going to die. You know, what's the purpose of getting on the path to start with? So now, if you want to be able to make it to the goal, whatever it is, if there's a treasure, an Aztec treasure or something that you want to get to, or if you just want to get to the top of the mountain to be able to see everything, it doesn't make a difference what it is. If you're going to get there, you're going to have to abide by the dimensions that are provided on the trail.
It's usually single.
Yeah, single. And if, you know, if you can't live with that, so, well, I'll never get on that trail. Well, that's what life is. You know, if you want to understand that there's a narrow path that makes it to the Father, either accept His pattern to get there, or don't claim to be a follower of His to start with.
That's right. All righty. Now, we see this in as far as the early church. He's warning them, is he not? Turn with me to Jeremiah, the 18th chapter and verse 12. Jeremiah 18, verse 12. Think Israel had this problem before? Yeah, they did. Notice verse 12. And they said, these are the people of God. Here's Jeremiah. He's prophesying to them, telling them, look, God's not pleased with what you're doing. And they said, there is no hope, but we will walk after our own devices, and we will everyone do the imaginations of his evil heart. When we were growing up, I can remember only one time of ever defying my parents. And after that, I remembered not to do that again. Very vividly. If you ever eat off the mantle board, if you don't know what that is, I'll explain to you later. All righty. That's right, you couldn't say that. The point that I'm getting at is, here is these individuals, Jeremiah is telling them, here's what God's law says. And notice, and they said, there is no hope. They've already said, there's no hope for us. Just leave us alone. We're perfectly happy with it. That we will walk after our own devices, our own way. What Jeremiah say later on? Not a man direct his other.
Chapter
10, okay, 10 verse 23, I believe. All right. So here's Jeremiah. He is telling these people these things. God's telling them these things. And they say, we'll just do it our way. So this is, again, the idea of getting away from God, the consequences. And we can also see in Jeremiah 22, and verse 21 as well. All righty, any questions?
Jeremiah 6, to walk in the good ways or walk in the old path.
Old path.
Or the good ways. And then they responded to that, we will not.
Mm-hmm. So these, not only the idea of defying Jeremiah, they are actually defying God, because Jeremiah is the messenger of God. And he's telling them what God is telling him, and they say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to follow God. We're not going to do those things. How sad can you imagine for a moment's time? I can't. I really can't imagine. But for a moment's time, someone out here, maybe let's say in the parking lot out here, with a defiant attitude, just daring God to strike him down, or just maybe in a defiant attitude, blasphemy, or maybe even cursing or something along that line. No, how dumb is it? And what we talk about a fool, that's describing a fool there. That's right.
But you go back to the situation in Jeremiah, and you can put it in a modern day context as well. Well, there are people that, when we stand up against those things that you talk about in Romans chapter 1, and we speak about them, and then this is something that has been noted by God and condemned by God, and we bring that up, then how are we accepted?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you then you go back to Jeremiah 18, and you notice how they did with him in verse 18. Then said they, come, let us devise devices against Jeremiah. So let's see what we can do about getting rid of him.
Mm-hmm.
Let us smite him with the tongue, and let us not give heed to any of his words.
And not only that.
Well, that's why so many preachers and other righteous people get so frustrated.
Oh yes. And even later on in this chapter, was it verse 15? Yeah, because my people have forgotten me, they have burned incense to vanity, and have caused all this problem. He said, I'll forget them too. Taking the blessings away from, God's taking the blessings away from Judah or from Israel.
Another way Paul said, am I your enemy?
Because they is true. And then verse 16, he says, I'll make the land desolate and perpetual hissing, and everyone that passeth through shall be astonished and waggle their heads. Oh, how sad. All righty. So this is the idea of the second command. Thou shalt have no. That's enough right there. No graven images unto anything. All right, any questions? Let's look at our discussion for just a moment. We have pictured or let's see. Maybe we have pictures or a status of Jesus. Our statues. Anybody?
If you see people that say this is what they think Jesus looked like.
Mm-hmm. Well, my grandmother had all that. That's, and she'd tell you that's a picture.
Yeah.
And that's picture Jesus.
There is many that have statues.
Yes.
Around the religious world, and it's all having to do with Christendom. So, is it wrong to see that statue in a cathedral or something?
I think it is because what the connotation that we give to it, we bow before it, and isn't it one of the statues that in the cathedral in Rome that has been kissed so many times that the base of it has been deteriorated. So this is the idea. This is people are bowing before and worshiping a statue, and this is what happens. We're no longer worshiping God. This now has become our statue, our God that we can bow before. It wouldn't be any different if that was a statue of a golden calf. See the
Well, they
concept?
associate the image with Christ.
That's right.
So I mean, you look, but more than anything else, it's not so much Christ with a lot of these people that marry.
Mhm. Yes.
So that's, most of that, which they're gonna be doing that is association there, which again is the problem. That which they're supposed to see, the image, trying to remember the text in the Colossian letter, is Christ in you, the hope of glory. And so when others see us, they're to see him. So there's where the image is to be displayed, and that's in us.
Okay.
Not in some physical description that no man has.
That's right. Nobody, they didn't have Kodiak pictures back in that time. Okay. All right. All right. What's the difference between the first and second command? Is there time? Is that okay? I'm sorry. We'll begin then, the Lord willing. And our next one is how to talk, we might say. Do not profane the name of God. All righty. I appreciate everyone's comment. Thank you very much. And appreciate your comments.